Good day, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of the basics of Unreal Engine 4 modding. In today's episode, we will be going over visual file types. Um, and visual file types are things like textures, materials, and material instances. In a moment here, we will discuss when and why to mod a certain file type. But first, let's start by opening all the folders and the tools that we need to mod Unreal Engine 4 games. Okay, so now that we have all the tools and folders ready to mod Unreal Engine games, let's open up the pack file or the pack folders here of our game in UModel. So I'm going to do that right now. So select that folder. This game is on 4.27. Just going to select sound. And I actually have the AS key prepared here in a document to the side. So boom, there we go. All right. So now, let me just do this. Right. So now, let's go on to the next step here. Right. Let me explain what visual file types are. So visual file types, I'll have a slide on the screen here. Visual file types is textures, it is materials, and it's material instances. Now a material instance is a material, it's just instanced. So you don't have to recompile the shader every time. And they're interchangeable. In a game at least, in a game setting. Okay, so now that we know what the basic file types are, let's go on to explain what parenting is. So in any game engine, you have a world, and in the world, you put different objects. And an object can be have something like a mesh in it, right? And a mesh has to then have a shader so that you can see it on the screen. And that shader, that is a material. A shader and a material, it's the same thing, different words here. And a mesh is a parent of a material. So the mesh asks for the material, right? So that is the parent of the material. You could say, that's not, you could, let's call it that. And then the material asks for the texture. And so the texture or the material is the parent of the texture. Now the texture is at the very end of all of this, and so the texture is not a parent of anything. So when you mod a texture, what you're doing here is you are modding the last piece of the puzzle. You're modding the very last piece of this chain. So let me read on the screen here for you guys. So a mesh is displayed onto the screen with a shader, a material. This shader material then loads the texture onto the mesh using the UV coordinates to map the texture to the surface of the mesh. This means that the mesh is the parent that loads the material, and that the material is the parent that loads the texture. So when you change a texture, you change the very end of the file parent hierarchy. To get the maximum level of control, you always want to reach further up into the file parent hierarchy. So that means that if I mod a texture, that is all the control I get. Now, if I then choose to mod the material, I may basically have all the control of the material and I can choose any textures or anything I want down the line from there on. So I can change all the textures, like mapping textures like bump maps, ambient occlusion maps, all these things, roughness maps, metallicness maps. I can set parameters, everything. Now, to go even further, you can go one step up and you can replace the whole mesh of something, and that gives you even more control. So that gives you, the control of having a different character on screen with a whole different material with a whole different textures. So you can always reach upwards into the chain of command here. Right. So when do we mod textures? We mod textures when we want to edit an already existing texture and not replace the texture with another texture. What does that mean? Well, let's say you have a texture. It's a brick texture. And all you want to do is really, you want to change the color of it, or you want to add some graffiti to that brick. Then you want to mod the texture. But if you want to replace that with a whole, like that brick with a whole different texture, then you do not want to mod textures. That's when we go to modding the material itself. Right, so let's go on to the next part. When do we mod materials? We mod materials when we want to replace a texture with another texture that would not match with the already existing material properties. And that's just what I explained before here. If you want to replace the brick with, for instance, floor tiling, right? Then the normal maps of the brick wouldn't fit, right? You'd see the normal maps of the brick onto the floor tiling, and it wouldn't look right. And so that's when you don't mess with the textures when you're doing those kinds of mods. That's when you mod the material. Right. Now, there is something called a material instance, and that is an instance of a material. And when you instance a material, you make an instance that multiple objects can reference, basically. So you only compile the shader once, you only load that shader once, and different objects can use it, that instance. So when do we mod an instance? Well, an instance of a material is a material in Unreal Engine. Now, if you load a material instance onto an object, or if you load a material onto an object or a mesh, there's no difference really. The only thing different is that using material instances is going to be better for performance to get less draw calls than loading every material, a new material every time. And it's also going to be faster to work with material instances when we're modding, because we can make a few different master materials and just swap out textures and things like that. So when do we mod material instances? Well, we mod material instances when we want to make material modding faster and instance our materials for better performance. So if a game already uses an instance for something and you want to mod that, well, it's no different than you would be modding a material, just a normal material. You would be doing the same thing. But if you want, you can just, right click, create material instance, and then you can use that, let the game load that instance instead. So it's relatively simple. Right. And now that we have explained how we use these three different file types, let's go on to actually showing you how it works. So let's go on to the next part. All right, let's go on to the tutorial part of this video. Now, in the first part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to texture mod. And as we all know, we texture mod when we want to change something on a texture and edit that texture. So let's get started with that. Right, so we have the game open here in UModel, and we're going to go to character, and we're going to find a texture here that we want to mod. Now, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to find the diffuse texture for this character, which is Ribsman in the game session. Now, I'm going to export this. So now that I know that this is the texture that I want, you go back to Open Package and you hit Export. So when you texture mod, you can just hit Export. You don't have to save package. Right. So now that we have this exported, we go in and we find this texture here. Now, here we have the texture, and when you texture mod, as I told you before here, all you really want to do is edit a texture. You don't want to replace it. So that's what we are going to do here. We are going to make a few edits. So we're going to do something like this, and boom, there we go. So we're going to make a few edits to this texture. We're going to hit save, and then we are just going to copy the whole path here. Not copy, we're just going to drag and drop this character folder into Unreal Engine. We already have the character folder here, but we can just drag and drop it. And as you can see here, if we go back into character, unique script, I think I already have a materials folder, but from before. But here we have textures, and in textures we got the edited Ribsman texture. Now just hit save, yes, and then you just go in and you cook content. You can close that. You'll have a sound when it's done here. So I'm gonna go back. Let's go back in here. Let's go to content in our game, and let's wait for the sound. And there we go. The mod is done. So we go to our cooked folder in our project and the Unreal projects. Windows No Editor, Session Game, the project name here, and content. And then we want to copy the character folder with our mod into the content folder of our game. So now we have, you can see content, character, and content, character. So it looks the same here. Right. Now all we have to do is boot up the game, and we will have our mod loaded. So let's do that. All right. And let's see here. It might have to recache shaders or something, so it could take a little bit longer this first time that we load it up. Yeah, seems like it. So let me drink a little bit of water for now. Okay. So, as you can see in the game here now, our texture looks exactly the way we edited this texture. So this is a texture mod. Now this is the use case kind of scenario when you texture mod, when you want to make an edit of an already existing texture. Then it's fine, and it'll come out right, and it'll look, great. Well, let's go on to part 2 now, and I will show you how to material mod and when we should material mod. Right, so let's get rid of that mod. Let's go back in, well, actually, let's find a material that we can replace. So let's go back into UModel, and let's go to Ribsman here, and materials. If we click on the costume, you see here and load it up, the costume materials, we're getting the same texture because this material loads that texture. So that's how that works. Now, let's go back here And what you can do with Unreal Engine is, or with UModel, is you can actually click Export on a material. And if we go in here, what you'll see is that in textures, you'll have you'll have all of the textures that that material uses will be exported for you. And under materials, you'll have two files here, and they contain some uh, some information about how that material was built up. And now this is not something you can just copy into the engine. You won't be able to. But this can help you kind of reverse engineer and rebuild that material if you so want to. The matte file, you can also click Edit with Notepad, and let me bring it over, and it'll look like this. You'll basically see here that the diffuse texture has this name, and the normal texture has this name, and so on and so on. Right. So, so how do we mod a material here? Well, very simple. You just take the name of that .mat file or the .props file here. So this name, not .props. But yeah, you can take the mat file, that's the best. And just take the name of it without the file extension. You go into the Unreal Editor. You go back here. And now you want to make that materials folder. So we already made the path to Ribsman and textures. And I already made materials in the past in our last tutorial, so I don't have to make it again. But if it's not there, you just right click, click new folder, and you recreate this folder right in here into Ribsman. So we have the same folder structure. Now, when you're in here, what you want to do is you want to right click, you want to create material, and then you want to give it the name of the material so that they have the same name. Hit save all, and boom. Now we have a material that will be replacing when loaded, when we copy the character folder into the contents folder of our game, then this will be loaded instead of the one inside of the pack. Right, so let's make something out of this material. Okay, so when you material mod, that is when you want to replace the texture entirely. So let's do that. So let's make a texture in paint.net, and let's just do something like this. And you know, you can do anything. And let's save this. So let's do save as PNG, and let's hit save. Okay, so now we have a texture that is completely original that we made. And I have it in here. I saved it into the game folder here. And all I have to do now is, because we already have that material in the correct location. So what we can do is we can just, because from a material you have control over what texture you load. So now we don't have to recreate any paths or anything. So you can just make a folder called mod textures. And you just drag that in to mod textures. Boom, right like that. And we save selected, right? And now is the cool part. Now, when this is loaded, we have full control downwards from that parent. So let's open this material up like this, and let's hook up our first texture to this material. So this right here is the material, and the things you can hook up to it. So let's make our first parameter here. So let's make a texture sample parameter 2D. Boom, just like that. Call it texture param. You can call it anything you want, but I'll call it that. And then hook up. So in this game that I'll be modding, the lighting is kind of dark and it can be hard to see. So if we just hook up the RGB values to base color, and if we go here into the details, we scroll down and we select our texture. So let's find our texture. What's the name of it? It's called tutorial texture, right? So in here, we will just type tutorial texture. Boom. So in this viewfinder here, you can see the texture very clearly. But in the game that I'm modding, it's kind of hard to see because of the way the lighting is set up. So I'm just going to break that link, and I'm gonna pull the RGB values to emissive color. And emissive color is, as you can see, controls which parts of your material will appear to glow. Now, if you put the RGB values into emissive, that will be the whole texture will kind of glow a little bit. So if we do that and we hit apply and save, and we minimize that, now you can see our material looks like this. You can see it in here in this little thumbnail. So let's hit save. Let's go to file and let's cook this. Now this is our first material mod. And as you could see, because we have control from the material down, we could put any material properties we want in here, and I'll show you a little bit more later. And so let's do the same thing here. Let's go into session game, content, and let's just copy the character folder from our cooked folder, right, and down. Let's copy that in here. And let's start it up. And this should boot up much quicker this time. Oh, now this is a lesson for you all. And I forget this a lot of the time. But our character in the game, so you can see he just had a gray grid material. The reason that happens is because a character mesh that moves, any mesh that moves can move, is a skeletal mesh. And when you use a material with a skeletal mesh, you actually need to set a setting into the material. So you search for skell, and then right here, used with skeletal mesh. Check that box, hit apply, hit save, and save all, and then we're going to cook this once again. I apologize for that. It happens to me all the time, and it'll happen for you all the time. So make this a lesson for you all to always check that box when you use this with a skeletal mesh. Right, now it's done. We're going to copy that folder once again over to the games content folder. And we're going to boot up this game. And this time we are going to have a working material. Boom. So there we go. Now, we can see this very clearly. It looks very good actually. And that is because we hooked it up to the emissive slot of the material. And if I hadn't, you would barely be able to see this. So if it's like that for your game as well, then I would advise to hook it up that way. But yeah, so this is a material mod. And one last thing I'll show you, but what you should really do right now, if you want to learn material modding and learn how materials work, go on YouTube and search for anything about how to work with Unreal Engine 4 materials. Now, I'm not going to teach you about how to make materials because that is not my job. That is up to the whole, there's a whole YouTube community out there of Unreal Engine developers that make tutorials on how to make materials. So go out there and look at all of those videos and learn how to make materials. But I'm going to show you just one last thing here. And that is one useful thing you can use, which is scalar parameters. So if we go into our material, and you can do something like this, type scalar, and you'll get a scalar parameter. And what you can do with this is you can hook that up, for instance, to the roughness of this. You can do roughness, hook it up to roughness. Oh, sorry, hook it up. And if you look at this material here, if you kind of look at it, you can see it's shiny because it's 0. So it's very, very shiny right now. So if I were to switch out that texture for something else, so let's do this, which is black. Hey, you see this? You see how shiny that is? You can see the whole world reflecting in that material. Now, if you set the default value to 0.1 and hit enter, you can see it's, oh, sorry, 0.1 and then 0.2. You know, the more I go up in value here, the less shiny this is until it's completely opaque. It's completely just, you know, or it's completely rough. So now it looks a lot like cloth, which is, you know, what this is. So you'd probably want this at a high value. So this is something nice. This is kind of a very basic material here, and that is how I'm going to keep this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to switch this back to our tutorial texture, just like that. All right, so now we are done with material modding. So let's go over to material instance modding. All right, so now that we have a basic material set up and we want to mod a material instance. All right, right? Now, this game has material instances, and they're usually labeled like this, MAI, material instance. And if we open this instance, material instance, you'll see that it's just a material. You know, you can kind of see here change, the lighting and shadows change. It has properties to it, normal maps and so on. But a material instance is just a material. It's an instance of a material. And so if you mod a material instance, or if you mod a material, there is really not, there is no difference. You can replace a material instance with a material and a material with a material instance. So what I'm going to show you today is just replacing a material with a material instance and how that can be used to quickly make changes to a material. So we're going to still be replacing this, which is the costume of Ribsman. And we're going to replace that with a material instance. So how would we do that? Well, first of all, we would need to rename this right here. So let's save this and close this editor. And what we want to do right now is we want to rename this material because we want to make an instance. So copy the name of it. Make sure you have the name copied first. When you have the name copied, what you can do is go to the very top here, or the very beginning of this name, and you can put something like, you can rename mat to material, like that. So it'll be called material, blah, 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 whatever. Hit save all, you know, save everything, and then right-click it, create material instance, and then copy the name over, paste it in that the material had just a moment ago. Boom. So now we have Matt, AMXX, Ribsman costume as a material instance. Now what's going to happen is the game, instead of reading this material over the other material, it's going to read our material instance and load properties from this material. So this material instance is a parent kind of this. It loads from this material and gets its properties from this material, but you can also change parameters inside of a material instance. So how does that work? Double click the material instance, and then we need to check these parameter groups here. So these are parameter values, and what you can do here is what happens is a material instance, because it's instanced, you it's a shader that is compiled once, and that's it. Like you're using that one shader with multiple things. And what you can do is you can in real time change. You see how quickly that is? Instead of having to recompile it, the shader, like we do with the material, you can set the properties, the parameters of this material from inside of this um, instance. So let's set this to 0 to make it kind of shiny like that. And what you can do as well is you can just switch out, boom, you can switch out this the texture, because it's a parameter texture. It's a texture parameter 2D, so we can swap out the texture. So if I hit save here, what you're going to see when we go back is that this is the material, and this is the instance of this material. But you can see the material has this texture, but this instance has another texture because we swapped out the texture just in this instance. So this means that this is a compiled shader, and this just locates, or it swaps out the parameters of an already compiled shader, so to get different looks. And it's very efficient. So you save draw calls, and it's it's more performant, and it's much quicker to do changes to something like this than to continually just make new materials. So now that we have Ribsman, a shiny Ribsman here, let's hit save all, and let's cook this, and let's test out our material instance and load that instead of our material. And yeah, let's watch that work. So we will go in here. Let's just delete the character folder completely now that we have a bunch of new files, and copy it over. And let's load this up. And what you're going to see is a shiny skeleton. Now, because this game's lighting, it's very hard to see shiny stuff. And you'll see that here in a second. So we won't really be able to see how shiny this is. You can kind of see it maybe if you go out here and you look from an ant like that. Yeah, you see that? So as you can see, a material and a material instance is interchangeable. You can replace one with the other, and both has their advantages and disadvantages. I like to stick with material instances and make a master material, and then just replace every material that I want to replace with an instance of that master material. So if you want to learn about master materials, look that up, Google it, YouTube search it, and you can learn how to make a master material. And that is a material with a load of properties that are parameters that you can change and just hot swap kind of into making really good materials, but material instances out of it. So that is how that works. Right. So now that I've shown you how to mod textures, materials, and material instances, let's get here to the conclusion, right? So the conclusion is, I guess, when should we mod these file types? Well, as we know, as I explained before, textures you mod when you just want to edit an already existing texture, add something to it, change colors of it, things like that, right? And you need to kind of rely on the existing material structure that already exists, that the developers made, right? And when do we want to mod a material? Well, that is when you don't want to rely on an already existing material structure. So that is when you want to put new textures, new normal maps, new parameters like scalar parameters. You want to make an entirely new looking, fresh looking, let's say there is a shiny texture already in the game, and you want to make that a matte texture, another texture, but it's matte. So you want to make some metallic thing into a brick, right? That is when you mod a material. And when do we mod material instances? Well, first of all, of course, if it's already a material instance in the game, make it a material instance. Replace it with another material instance. Yes, it's interchangeable with a material, but you kind of want to use instanced materials much more, than you want to use actual compiled shader materials. So try to stick with instances as much as you can for performance, for ease of use. Like everything is easier with an instance. Yeah, so I guess that is about it for this explanation. Oh yeah. No, I think that was it. Yeah, so you use a material instance if it's already in a material instance, or if it's a material even. You kind of just want to use material instances. So I'd say that's a wrap. I'd say that's about it. So thank you so much for watching. All right. This was part 4 of the Basics of Unreal Engine 4 Modding tutorial series. In the next video, we will go over how to mod audio files in Unreal Engine 4. See you in about 2 weeks. Peace.